Live from our studios, just steps from the fabulous Las Vegas Strip, it's the Business Lounge with your host, David Wright.
Hi, I'm your host, David Wright, and welcome to the Business Lounge, where we talk to real people about real business and real success. With me today, I have Bill Clingen. He is the president of Macro Wealth Integration. Bill, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
You know, it's really nice that we had a phone conversation not that long ago through a mutual friend, and here we are going to have a conversation in which I hope will at least enlighten some people that listen to the show in regard to legacy and what that means and creation of wealth, and then managing their wealth as they go forward. Because I'm getting older, and I'm sure a great deal of people, the baby boomers of my generation, are also in that same boat. So I have to ask, are you a native of Nevada?
No, I'm not.
So where are you originally from? Tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got here.
We're great, happy to. I was actually born in Ohio. My parents were missionaries and were in the concentration camp of World War II in the Philippines. Subsequently, from Ohio, we moved to New York, then moved back to California, several places there, then moved back to Ohio, then moved to New York, and then moved back to California. And for the last 2 years, my wife and I moved to Vegas, and we love it.
Okay, so you said something very interesting, just because I love history. I love the whole process and what, people often hear so much about the concentration camps that are located in Poland and Germany and the like. Tell me about the one in the Philippines. Help me understand that just a little bit.
My parents were in Manila learning French. It was a French colony. They were going to be missionaries in that part of the world. And Manila was attacked by the Japanese, and they fled to the jungle and hid out for a year. My brother was about 1.5 years of age at the time. About a year later, the Japanese finally came up and captured them and took them to Santa Tomas and subsequently to Los Baños, where they were being starved to death. My mom got pregnant with my sister. They were going to be executed, actually shot, when MacArthur fell out of the sky and rescued them.
That, I have heard so many stories like that. And, in an instant, lives change. I mean, they just can change. And I think that's really what you're here to talk about today, are those changes in life. So help me understand what legacy wealth is, or kind of get my arms around that legacy component of what you do for people.
Well, what I want to do, and I work with an attorney in the area and some other folks from Palm Mortuary and St. Rose Hospital, and what we're trying to do is to get people to realize that life has its own process and it ends at some point. Rod Stewart, the great rock and roller, said it best: life is brief and time is a thief when you're undecided. So what I want people to do is get decided about their wealth, get decided about passing it forward, leave it to their family, to their charities, to whoever, and forget about it. But invariably, people have this premonition that something's going to happen if they do that and don't do anything, and then something does happen, then chaos ensues.
Just looking at what you had said, do you have a sense of how many people die without a will or a process to pass their wealth on? And we don't have to talk about a lot of money. We can talk about a home or cars or whatever the case may be. So,
no, I don't have that statistic, but the attorneys I work with certainly do. But the number is pretty substantial. Because a lot of people come to our seminars, and a lot of people now are understanding the value of what we're trying to do. And then we have a good time, we have a party. There's no reason for you to be under the cloud of, oh, I should have done so, when it can be done, and then you can celebrate with your family.
So when I know there are a lot of people, myself included, that really start thinking about how am I going to be remembered? What happens during that process? But you also do forms of wealth management. Is that correct?
No, I actually do the protection of the wealth.
Protection. Help me understand that.
Well, wealth is protected by a couple of processes. First of all, a will and a trust, and all of that have to be put into place. I believe in having a family meeting. I believe the family should gather together and everybody should know exactly what's going on. I've had a lot of experience over 41 years of doing that. Then life insurance is usually purchased to cover the estate taxes and whatever expenses may be incurred. Then the attorney has done their job in getting the documents in place. Then it's just a matter of managing and paying attention to, as time goes along, this process, so that you don't have an issue down the road of chaos ensuing because, oh, I thought I was going to get that and I got this, and all of a sudden they find themselves in probate court.
You know, I've seen quite often on television, I'm sure the audience has as well, in regard to having some type of what they will call funeral protection or whatever. How do you view that product? Is that a good product? I mean, there's a number of companies that offer whole life and term policies along that line.
Well, first of all, term insurance over the course, and I believe the insurance commissioners have stated it's about 96% of the time it's never paid on because people outlive it. Whole life insurance and or universal life insurance are products that can be altered to actually pay for themselves. For an example, I have a client who happens to be a rock and roll attorney. He purchased a whole life product a number of years ago, called one day and he said, Bill, I need some long-term care insurance. What we did is we had the dividends from the whole life paid the premium for the whole life, and the long-term care now premium he's writing as he was paying it to the whole life. And the premiums are actually $25 a year more doing it that way.
You know, that's pretty amazing. I don't think people really understand what all it takes to come to that end of life decision. I have my mother-in-law was here and she was in an assisted living facility and eventually died, and that entire process was open to me because I didn't understand it at the time, but I understand more now. How else can families protect themselves in regard to their assets going forward with end-of-life decisions?
Well, I'm a real believer in long-term care insurance. I'm a certified senior advisor. And it's very important to realize that nursing care is going to be escalating dramatically over the next years because people are living longer. And so if you have that under control, it leaves more money to the family than it would be if you didn't have so. I want to leave as much to the family as humanly possible through this process. And by doing so, you're going to be maximizing the wealth generated to pass on, hopefully tax-free, because life insurance, of course, is a non-taxable asset, if held properly, to the family members.
So you hit on a key word, and I always pick up on what people say because they may not understand when you said held properly. What does that really mean?
Well, if it's held in a trust, if it's those sorts of legal documents are put into place.
So you would basically advise people from your experience, and you're not an attorney or an accountant,
Right.
so we're not going to put you in that position.
Right.
I understand, but you would basically advise people if they have a trust that all their assets should be put into that trust and managed through that trust to help protect them.
Well, the best stories I've told are those stories where I've sat down with all the family members, the attorney, and the CPA, and coordinated everything.
Okay. Give me an example of what happens if you don't have those protections in place.
Well, I used to be an EMT years ago, and I've actually witnessed fistfights in emergency rooms when Dad died, and the two brothers got at one another thinking that they were going to get this and found out they didn't. That's what happens. It's called probate. It gets very nasty, very expensive, and rather than having a loving family, it ends up in chaos and hatred.
You know, that's pretty amazing. So this really kind of makes the decision for the family during that process, whether it's the dad, whether it's a grandparent, whether it's mom or whoever, aunt, uncle. It's best to have at least some plan in place to ensure that those assets are protected. So give me probably the funniest story that you've encountered through doing this process? I just heard a sad one where two siblings were fighting over. What's one of the funnier stories?
Oh, let me see here. Well, I had a case years ago where the family members had everything in place, and it was funny because they all had thought nothing was done. And then when they found out everything was in place, they were happy. They laughed. It was joy because of everything being in place. So the funny part comes from the joy of seeing that it's done right, as opposed to a joke per se. Mm-hmm. And when it's done correctly, and the other thing I wanted to suggest is that things need to be updated and looked at. For an example, I've had cases where the beneficiary was for an ex-spouse, or they didn't have a contingent ownership and the owner died. I have a case that I worked on where a policyholder gave me his old policy that I had not sold, it was many years ago, found out that his grandfather had purchased it for him. He was the insured, the grandfather was the owner. Well, the father was the owner. The parents were killed on the Canary Island air crash. The insurance company wouldn't pay the cash values in the policy to the policyholder because his name was not on it. So happily, we were able to give them the documentation from the air crash, and they subsequently paid him the money. But if that hadn't happened, that policy would have been sitting there and nobody would have known what to do because nobody owned the policy.
That's an interesting point that you just brought up about ownership of the policy. How deep should that ownership go? Now, I have a son and a daughter, and I also have a grandchild. Mm-hmm. So how should I make it so it's the spouse, the children, the grandchild? Should I actually make it that deep, or what would you recommend?
Well, first of all, a grandkid under the age of minor cannot cash the check. So it has to be an adult. That's why many times when you have grandchildren involved, you have a trust. The trust holds the policy and then subsequently pays the proceeds out, rather than the child at 8 years old going to the bank and saying, here's a check for $1 million, cash it for me.
Oh, okay. So therein lies a secret, let's say, of life insurance, in that if it's in a trust, there's an executor that then manages that trust. The child then can have access to those assets through the executor. Is that basically the story?
As long as it's been drawn up properly, yes. That's typically what it does. It protects the assets down the road, and subsequently also it protects the child from getting a large sum of money and spending it foolishly.
No, children never do that, do they?
Of course not. I never did.
I know my kids would never do something like that. What about, I know you're talking about life insurance. What about when it comes to how you protect other assets like real estate? I know that a lot of clients that I've dealt with in the past have had sizable real estate holdings, and they were asking, how do I protect that? What would you recommend to them?
Well, if they have partners, they should have a buy-sell arrangement. Okay, so you have insurance on each other's lives. In fact, I suggest to people, if your partner is not insurable, find another partner. Because invariably what happens is that you get into combat with the surviving spouse, and lots of luck. There's no reason for that. So make sure you have a buy-sell arrangement so they know exactly that they're going to be bought out at time of their death, whoever dies first, and the spouse goes home happy.
Okay. That's true for any type of business, whether it's a corporation or a sole proprietor or whatever the case may be?
Well, as long as you've got a business arrangement with somebody, legal documentation in place, certainly that would be a way to do. If it's sole proprietor, of course, then you have nobody to worry about, so you're just protecting your heirs or your spouse at that point.
I know a lot of times people think that they are overinsured. What would you recommend if I made, let's say the average person makes 60 grand a year. What would you tell that person they should be looking at in terms of making sure they're not underinsured?
Well, the insurance company does that a little bit for you, in the fact that when I apply for somebody who doesn't know how much, I ask the insurance company to qualify them as much as they can have. Okay, you can't be making $1,000 a year and buy 10 million. Okay, insurance companies have structure to how much they allow you to have. So rather than me second guessing how much you need, I'd rather put it in the hands of the insurance company saying, well, this is what you've been offered. How much of that do you want? Okay? And always remember, after my 40 years in the business, no one has ever handed the check back to me.
Yeah, that would be tough to take. So now I know a lot of people would say, oh, Bill, you know, I'm insured through work. I've got this covered. What would you advise that person to do?
You better be careful, because the work insurance is usually, you can't take it with you when you retire or if you leave the job. And if you become uninsurable, you got a problem.
So those are two precautionary notes. One is to make sure that you're covered if you move your employer. And then when you get ready to retire, one of the things you should probably consider then is talking to an insurance agent to make sure that you can get some life insurance so your loved ones aren't out there on a limb.
Right.
If I was 20 years old, just starting out in life, just new career, graduated or will be graduating from college, what would you tell me? What would you tell your grandson or your son? What advice would you give them?
Well, here's one technique that people don't realize. If you have a life insurance policy, a whole life policy, and you're paying a premium, over a period of time, that premium becomes cash value in the policy, which is a non-taxable event. I've had people buy houses, down payment on houses, and buy cars with a life insurance policy. They use it as their bank. They pay it back when they want to. I have a client who buys real estate for cash from the life insurance proceeds, cash value, then fixes the real estate, sells it, pays a policy back, and goes on to the next one. He doesn't have to worry about any loan documentation or what his income is. The money is there, he takes it, he uses it, and pays it back at his desire.
Okay. Typically, how long would it take for somebody to accumulate those assets to be able to do that?
It depends how much you put in, but usually about 10 years you start seeing your money being more than what you put into it.
Okay. So at that point in time, you could fund just about anything with it and then put it back in.
It just depends how much money you have and how much premium you're paying, sure.
But
sure.
when I say anything, not any level, but any type of. So, well, that's really good. You know what? We're just about out of time, believe it or not. I want to thank you for being on the show. Where can people find out more about where Bill can be located?
Well, you can go to my email, and that is bill@mymwi.com, or you can call me at 702-462-2581. I'd be happy to meet with you. I can introduce you to the attorney and the folks that I work with, and then get things underway, and then you can forget about it, and we just have a review every couple of years and make sure it's all still as you had suggested it be.
Okay. Bill, I want to thank you for being on the show today. This is Dave Wright with the Business Lounge, where we talk to real people about real success. Till the next time. Bye-bye.